Hello everyone, this is Venkat. Welcome to Venkat's Tech Talk. In this presentation, I'm going to talk about Visual Studio Code and productivity tips, tricks, and how to make the workflow better to work with Visual Studio Code. This particular tutorial targets for the Visual Studio developers who are more familiar with Visual Studio and trying to start using Visual Studio Code. When I first initially started working on Visual Studio Code, when I tried to move from ASP .NET MVC development into Angular development, I was I learned something with Visual Studio Code and tried to make my setup optimal to match my experience with Visual Studio. So I'm going to share my experience here in this part of this tutorial. So this presentation is organized into two parts. Like initially I will explain a couple of theoretical difference between Visual Studio Code and Visual Studio and why we need to do with Visual Studio Code. Why can't we use Visual Studio for front-end development? Because Visual Studio is a powerful editor. It has all the power to do web front-end development or front-end development and any sort of development because of a large ecosystem of extension and those things. So let us talk a bit about some theoretical aspects between Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code, and I will straight away jump into setting up the VS Code environment from scratch. We will install the Visual Studio Code, and step by step I will try to add the extension, set up the workflow so that we get the most productive into VS Code environment. Okay, that's all about this tutorial. Without any ado, let us get started. So first thing is why we need to use Visual Studio Code instead of Visual Studio. I will look into that one, and let us see also how we can quickly get productive in Visual Studio Code. Okay, and I will explain through certain tips and tricks and extensions, powerful extension that we need to use. Okay, so what is in this presentation? So who is this presentation is intended for? If you are a Visual Studio developer trying to move to Visual Studio Code for front-end development, and if you are an MVC developer, now you want to start working on a Angular or React based framework and you want to develop on that using some sort of IDE, if you are seriously asking yourself this question, why don't I use Visual Studio for front-end development instead of VS Code? Because I know already Visual Studio. I'm very familiar with it. I know all the ecosystems and I have all the extensions like ReSharper. Why I need to give up all these things and move to Visual Studio Code? If you're asking this question, absolutely this tutorial is for you. And also if you're concerned about losing all your pro user knowledge on Visual Studio by moving to a new unfamiliar IDE. This is a very common concern for anyone because all these years you would have worked on Visual Studio and you know in and out about all the menus and shortcuts and keyboard navigations. So you don't want to give up that and start like a fresher on a new IDE, and you are much concerned with productivity. So yeah, we will be addressing that as well. And if you are not getting enough motivation in heartfully accepting VS Code as an IDE, so if this presentation will target if you fall into any of these buckets. Okay, so let us move. Foremost question, why not Visual Studio instead of VS Code? Because Visual Studio supports web-based development using a folder-based project, because you'll be able to open a folder and start editing the project in Visual Studio. Along with solution files and project file, Visual Studio supports folder-based project as well without any issue. Okay, so why not? And moreover, if you look at Visual Studio project template, you can see there is an Angular project template already readily available. So with all these things, do we still need to go to VS Code? Can't I stick on to Visual Studio? Let us look into it. Why and why not? So first thing is we should avoid Visual Studio and we should try to use VS Code for front-end development. The reason is, if you look at Visual Studio Code, it is an established and popular active IDE in front-end development, front-end and not only in front-end, node developer and open source community. If you see like a majority of the front-end development or server-side JavaScript-based development is happening through Visual Studio Code. So that's not the only reason that we want to consider moving into Visual Studio Code. Because of the large population of developer community using Visual Studio Code, it got more powerful extensions and more continuous enhancement product updates happening with Visual Studio Code. If you see, Visual Studio Code is frequently updated. If you see in 2 weeks, you will see some bug fixes, enhancements happening to this product. So So VS Code is very mature and it is widely accepted in the open source community, and it is completely free. There is no licensing cost involved like Visual Studio, because directly your team can leverage VS Code and start commercial development without worrying about any licensing thing. So for me, the topmost reason for using Visual Studio Code, though I'm very much familiar with Visual Studio, is productivity. The reason is there are high quality extensions available in Visual Studio Code compared to Visual Studio for front-end development. Because if you look at very powerful extensions for Angular, Angular various tools and which helps productivity, those extensions are not unfortunately available for Visual Studio. It's only available for VS Code, because there are not many people using Visual Studio for front-end development, so there is no active extension development happening over Visual Studio, because the extensions, Visual Studio extensions, are entirely separate between these two IDEs. So extension developed for VS Code will not work with Visual Studio. So it's absolutely a different extension. So there are hundreds of high quality, highly productive extensions available in Visual Studio Code compared to Visual Studio. This alone stands as a top feature for me to choose Visual Studio Code instead of Visual Studio. Okay, now the next question is, okay, fine, I understand, but how to get more productive into this one? Because this is a new IDE, I'll not be more familiar with setting it up and making it according to my wish, and keyboard shortcuts and those things. So I will cover that as well, to see, like, specifically for a Visual Studio person, how you can get into VS Code development easily. I will show some of the tricks and tips that I learned. Okay. Okay, second thing is about, I have just displayed an Angular template in a couple of slides before. So we have an Angular template already as part of Visual Studio. Why don't we stick to that template and create a project? So apart from that reason that I mentioned, that productivity extension tips, and another reason, strong reason, that we don't want to use this Angular template is this is not pure CLI based template. So you know that the CLI template is the default Angular project template, where it is provided by Angular itself. So you can fire up ng command and create project, add libraries, and set up the environment. And that is the wonderful template to create project. But if you look at this template, this is not pure CLI template. You will see a lot of boilerplate code, .NET Core based code, which helps to start up some of these services and introduce some middleware, and many things are there, which is not which doesn't look like a straightforward CLI template. So when I started using this template, I end up with a couple of challenges when I need to migrate to a different Angular version, because it is not easy path to update an Angular version if you use this template. So hard lesson learned is, I don't want to use this template at all. I need to stick with the CLI template. Even if we use Visual Studio, if for any reason, or like we want to stick on with Visual Studio, still we can do Angular CLI template and with Visual Studio. So that is one reason. So we don't want to use this Angular template. I'm not sure, hopefully in future, if it will change a bit to have a complete CLI based template to work with Visual Studio. Okay, so yeah, as I mentioned in this slide, it will be tempting to pick up this template because you can see it, and if you start with this template, like, you will find it like easy, because you click this, you select this template and create a project. You will get a solution structure, and if you do an F5, your browser will open up. Everything will look shiny, but the upgrade path is difficult. Maintainability is a difficult issue. That's the reason we want to avoid this template. Okay. Okay, now it is time to get into the code. Directly go into Visual Studio Code and look at, like, how to set up the environment, and and also I will explain some of the keyboard shortcuts and menus, and couple of things that anyone needs to know Visual Studio Code for an higher productivity. Okay, let us get started. So another thing I want to point out is, this demo I'm focusing based on Angular development in Visual Studio Code. As we all know, like, VS Code is not purely only for Angular. You can use it for any kind of front-end development. It may be a React, or it can be a Node.js project, or it can be a Python. Even we can develop some of these .NET based server-side APIs using C# project template. So it can be used for a number of purposes. But in this demo, I'm just purely focusing on Angular development in Visual Studio Code. So so instead of showing it in a presentation in the slideshow, I will directly get into the Visual Studio Code, and let me show it. The first thing is, we want to make sure we want to have the project. Because Angular projects are not a solution or a CS project kind of projects in VS Code. If you are familiar with Visual Studio, we have the solution files, VBproj, CSproj, those kind of project files. But if you look at Angular, we don't have such kind of things. It's like a folder. We call it as a workspace. Workspace is nothing but a folder where it directly contains all the Angular project structure, like angular.json. So we want the editor's IDE's ability to open the project by choosing the folder and opening with the right click and opening with Visual Studio Code. So that is the very key option during installation you need to choose, because by default when you install VS Code, these two options will be unchecked. So traditionally we just be hit next, next, next and complete the installation. If you do that, you will miss choosing these two options, and then when you want to go to a folder and try to open it in Visual Studio Code, you will not get this context menu open with code. So just we need to make sure we notice this checkbox during installation and select these things and install it to get this keyboard shortcut. Okay, let me jump into my VM and show all these and all other tips directly in Visual Studio Code. Okay, let us get started. Okay. So I'm in the download page of Visual Studio Code. I'm going ahead with the user installer. I'm fine with installing for a one specific user instead of across multiple users in the system. System installer is for all the users. I'm just fine with single user. 64. Download is complete. I'm okay with this. Next. Accept the agreement. Next. 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 Okay, this is what I was referring to. Create a desktop icon, add open with code, add open with code, context menu, next, install. Finish. Okay, installation is complete now. So now we got Visual Studio IDE. So this is the version without any extensions or any additional setup or configuration to make our productivity better. So this is the default version of what we get after installing VS Code directly. Now let us look at how we can make the IDE better, and also my intention is to somehow make my experience of this IDE closer to Visual Studio, because I'm coming from Visual Studio background. I want to ensure I get the similar kind of experience in VS Code. So first thing, so so this IDE is a bit different, because if you look at Visual Studio, you have a solution explorer on the right basically, and even you can just float it around left and right. It's a MDI kind of interface, but this is not that rich, but still it is powerful. It doesn't lack any of the feature. You can go ahead with the debugging, and you have debugger enable, like you can go line by line debugging, step in, step out, and all these things are there, like a code completion, going to definition. And by the just look of this IDE, we don't need to think like this is a bit inferior. It's in fact so powerful. Whatever we can do in Visual Studio, we'll be able to do it here, like refactoring the code, going to the definition, picking the definition, and source control integration, whether with Git or TFS, and bookmarks. A lot of things are there, but the thing is, like, many of the good features not comes by default with Visual Studio Code. You need to find a nice extension, and the used extension, like where most of people trust and use those kind of extension to improve our experience. That is one slight demerit, because in Visual Studio almost like you get all these things as part of without any additional extension except resharpen. So you get most of the things, but here I believe definitely without many extensions we will not be able to have a good productivity in Visual Studio Code. Okay, so enough lecture on just talking about VS Code. Let us get into how to make this environment better. Okay, so if you look at this thing, just a quick introduction to the layout if you are not familiar. So this is the welcome page, and you can close it. It's like similar to Visual Studio, and if you look at the left hand side, you have this bar which gives the file explorer. If you have a project open, you will see all the folders and file at this location, and this is a find and replace, which is one other powerful feature if you want to find some content and replace within the file, which is similar with like a control shift F, control shift H, which works in Visual Studio as well. The same key, control shift F and control shift H, and yeah, it also shows the shortcut for each thing. Control shift E for expanding this thing. Okay, this explorer. And then this is a source control, so it works with both Git and TFS, and this is a debugger interface, and this is the extensions. Okay, what are all the extensions you is currently got installed or what we want to install and everything. Search and install the extensions. Okay, and second thing is terminal. You can click terminal and new terminal to get this section. This is very one of the key section because mostly in the front end projects like front end development we will be working with npm commands, installing packages, uninstalling packages, and all those things we will work at the terminal. So terminal is a very important thing. You don't need to go to this menu. We can do it through keyboard shortcut, control and tilde to bring the terminal off and on. And here you see some of the prominent keyboard shortcuts. Okay, so Control Shift P is bringing the command palette, show all commands. Control Shift P will bring the command palette. This command palette is one of the very powerful what interface in VS Code to bring any command. If you don't know the keyboard shortcut, you can try to type it here and it will bring it. For example, like I want to change some setting, you type the setting and it will show what are all the settings you can change. Project preferences, preferences, open setting, UI. So if I click this UI, I can find a lot of text editor, cursor, key, font, formatting, and everything. Okay, even within this we can search the settings. Okay, now I want to bring the keyboard shortcuts. Okay, sorry. Okay, preferences, open keyboard. Because exactly I don't know what's the keyboard shortcut for this menu. Open keyboard shortcuts. Just when I type the short, it brings in all the related things. So yeah, I am exactly looking for this keyboard shortcuts. Okay, click it and you will find all the keyboard shortcuts available here. And not only it shows, we'll be able to go and change some of the key bindings as well. So this is an example of how powerful is this command palette. Control Shift P. So open a file. Okay, file, open file. So you will find almost every menu and every possible interaction with VS Code through command palette, in case if you don't know the keyboard shortcut. Ideal thing is if you know the keyboard shortcut, you don't need to just go one step, one more, you can avoid a couple of more clicks. Okay, okay, fine. So command palette and terminal we looked into. Now let us go into how to customize this one. The first thing which I feel a bit odd with this interface based on my Visual Studio experience is its color. So I know even in Visual Studio people used to work with a dark theme, but I prefer a light theme which comes in Visual Studio as a kind of a blue background and a white color background and text in a prominent black. So just I want that kind of look and feel. So I found out an scheme extension for getting that kind of interface. Let me go to extension. So this is the extension. So I can directly find my extension that I want to look into. I'm looking for. I want Visual Studio Light extension. So Visual Studio Light theme. I want this theme. Okay, this is the theme I was looking for. So it will show how many installations, 18,000 installations. So just always take a look of how many people installations are there, like to check the familiarity, like how popular among the community. 18,000 looks like a good amount of installations. In fact, I have used this extension earlier. I know it's perfectly working. So I'm just giving you a tip of how to understand about the extensions. Okay, now I install this extension. Okay, perfect. Now I got that kind of light background look and feel. Set color theme. So I install. I'm making this as a color theme. Fine. Now it looks perfectly fine. Okay, let me go ahead and open my Angular project. I know, as I already told, this can open folder-based projects. Okay, this is the project. This is the project I'm opening in VS Code. Open with VS Code. Perfect. It opened this project, Angular project. So all my files are appearing here. Bindings, component, I'm able to open my component. So everything looks fine, but this tree looks a bit not polished. I want to improve this experience. So one other key extension is VS Code icons. I really want to differentiate the icon for each type of file. So let me go ahead and install VS Code icons. Okay. So 15 million installations. It proves 100% it's a familiar extension in the community. I'm going ahead and installing this extension. Installation complete. Setting the file icon theme. Okay. Now, okay, look, it's so beautiful. So now I'm able to exactly understand the type of file by looking at the icon. It made this interface look better than earlier. Bindings, directives. Perfect. Okay. Okay. So looks cool. Okay, so one other thing, because it is coming from my previous installations. So if you look at this thing, I I went to settings, appearance, workbench appearance, 15. Tree indent is 15. By default, it is 8. If you don't have the setup earlier, once you install the Visual Studio without any customization, the default intent is 8. 8 will look like this one. Okay, I don't like this thing because it is highly difficult to understand whether this is a subfolder, whether this is a subfolder or the content of the specific folder, because indentation is at the same level. In Visual Studio, if you look at the child item, it will be bit intended towards the right, so that we clearly know this is the child item for this folder. So 8 is not sufficient. I already made it as 15. That is the reason it appears fine. So just make sure you change it according to your taste. If you find the structure is not appealing, you may consider changing the indentation to a higher number. So then you will see this child is bit intended. Okay, so fine, perfect. Now look and feel and theme is done. Now the second thing is, we would have worked with a lot of keyboard shortcuts specific to Visual Studio. So I want to bring in those kind of all the keyboard shortcuts here in Visual Studio Code as well. So I don't want to struggle with a new kind of keyboard shortcuts for anything like file open, cut, copy, paste, bracket match, and a lot of things. We have a lot of things we do in an IDE. So like moving up a paragraph and moving to the next line. So whatever keyboard shortcut you are using with Visual Studio. So we want to bring that same experience with Visual Studio Code. So one thing is like going to the key binding and manually binding every keystroke. So, but with extension, it's not required. We can bring in our familiar or whatever the keyboard shortcut, whatever the IDE we used in past, we can bring that preference here. So I want Visual Studio Keymap. So this is the extension. If you once you install this extension, this is also a familiar extension with 209,000 installations. Once you install this extension, you will get all the keyboard mappings that you have with Visual Studio in VS Code. So you don't need to learn a new keyboard shortcut for Visual Studio Code. Okay. So, and another thing I want to point out, this is not only available for Visual Studio thing. If you are coming from some other IDE, for example, IntelliJ, you will get the key bindings of IntelliJ. So if you want resharper bindings, you will get resharper bindings. Sublime bindings, Keymap settings. So you will find if you're thinking of making this IDE almost similar to some other IDE in terms of keyboard shortcut, definitely you can look for the keyboard key mapper for that specific IDE and bring it in. So I'm interested in with Visual Studio Keymap. Let me go ahead and install Visual Studio Keymap. Okay, that's it. Now my IDE is completely customized with the keyboard shortcut as it is in Visual Studio. Okay, fine. So for if you look at this extension, it will show what are all the extensions we have installed. We have installed theme, icons, and Visual Studio Keymap. Okay. Now I want to go ahead with Angular specific extensions. Okay. Because I'm very much focused with installing Angular. I can go ahead with this one. So a couple of extension is like debugger for Chrome. Okay. Absolutely, this is an required extension if you want to debug the application by running in the Chrome. So install it. At any point of time, if you find some of the extension is not useful, or you feel that is slowing down the IDE, absolutely you can go and uninstall at any point of time. So you can, without any question, you can go ahead and install the extension, and if you're happy, you can use it, or if you don't like it, you can just uninstall. And all these extensions are just folders, that's it. So whenever you install an extension, it copies into a folder and extensions under user profile. So it is a lightweight, nothing is going on with registry or installation, just it copies a file from the marketplace and it drops into a location. So it is lightweight, highly decoupled. Okay, now I installed debugger for Chrome. Well, let me go ahead with Angular specific installation. So I know what are all the extensions that I want to install, but better way is search for Angular and you'll find all the Angular related extensions. And among these all these extensions, really I want to use all the most popular extensions. So let me sort it by installation count. So now all the extension that you see are ordered in terms of its familiarity. Like if you see, mostly it will be like at least couple of millions, or at least couple of hundreds of thousands. Okay, so Angular 8 snippets, almost 9 million. Angular 7 snippets. So these both these snippets are non-conflicting one, because if you look at the example, it shows like it starts with some specific characters for one and the other. For example, see like a-http, and if you look at this one, it will have some different one. So according to your choice, if you prefer, you can stick with this one, or if you want both, and you can install both, it will not give any conflict. So for me, fine, because these are the top extension without any question, I'll go ahead and install these both extension. Okay, and the third extension is, again, it's 1.6 million, Angular language service. Why this extension is important? So this extension brings a lot of intelligence to the um, HTML editor in Angular. So to precisely show all the intelligence that you want to get in ID. For example, if you after a dot, if you give after this object, if you give a dot, it should show the properties. And similarly, like here, like within the curly braces, if you type a dot, it want to show the code completion, and you want the ability to just go to the definition by clicking F12. So, and all these features comes through this extension, Angular language service. So so you will see how that specific extension helps by looking at this quick screenshot. So it shows like it is giving the IntelliSense. See, exactly, this is what. So I want this extension. Okay, next is Angular Schematics. We need this extension to get the ability to right click on the folder and create new component. So we know traditionally, if you want to create an Angular component, a new component, we can go ahead and give an ng command like ng new, ng generate component, ng generate service, and those things. Instead, we can directly go ahead and right click and create new component. So if you want to get that kind of feature, we need to install the schematic extension. So let me install this schematic extension. Okay, so if you see, Angular schematics are available, because still it's installing. Once after installed, Angular schematics, I noticed it used to take a bit more time, or sometimes just a restart helps. Let me restart, because sometimes I noticed this doesn't change even though after completing installation. Maybe a small bug. So let me close and open it again. See, it's already installed as I thought. Okay, now just to show that feature, like go and okay, still it needs to come. Sometimes it used to take a bit of time. That's fine, you will get eventually that option. Okay, let us come to the Angular extensions. sort by installation count. Okay. Fine. All other, I think like it's an optional thing. If you want, you can check and install, but these are all the some very important thing. Okay. And a couple of other notable extensions is, one is Git lens. This is a powerful extension to work with Git. You don't need to go with command prompt. It has a lot of features. It itself will require a separate video, and there are some YouTube videos if you want to know more about like how this Git lens help with Git. And it is not that you need to strictly use Git lens. Whatever Git IDE you prefer, like source tree or Git extension or tortoise, whatever, you can use anything outside Visual Studio, outside Visual Studio Code. But if you want to start using something VS Code natively, you can consider this extension. So this is one other extension if you want to, if you are interested. And another, let me install this as well. Okay. And if you are extensively working in a front-end application, defining a lot of style sheets for your application, you can consider installing CSS Peak. This is one other very powerful extension with more than 500,000 users. How this extension helps is like you can just go like a go-to definition. By clicking on the class name from the HTML element, you'll be able to just land on that extension, on that particular style definition. So it'll be very handy to work with styles. Like you don't need to look at the HTML code, for example, like look at the code, and here unfortunately I don't have any styling. But if you have some class definition, looking at what is that class and which file it is, and just doing a multiple click to go to that file, instead of that you can use this extension CSS Peak. So yeah, it will show here. So that's it. So for example, this container is a class. Once you click, it will show in where that style sheet is, and you can directly jump in. So this is another extension, very powerful extension. You can use it. Okay. And what else? Other couple of extensions. CSS Peak is good. Yeah, another one is JSON TS. So in mostly in front-end application, we deal with TypeScript and JSON. So sometimes we have the API result in a form of JSON. We want to create a TypeScript class for that one. So instead of manually creating a class, we can use JSON TS, where you copy the JSON into editor and it will create a TS. Yeah, paste JSON as a code. Yes. Yeah. So just you paste the JSON and it creates the code like this, and you can instantly edit here and it will get it here. So I think this is a end of session. So I have just covered all the key extensions. So to quickly recap, like we looked at like why we need to use VS Code, and why we should avoid Visual Studio, and how to make the IDE to match almost with our Visual Studio experience in terms of look and feel, keyboard mapper, and also we looked at a couple of keyboard shortcuts and command palette, and looked at some of the top extensions that we want to use in Angular development. Okay, thanks for watching this video. Have a great day. Catch up in the next presentation. Thank you. Have a great day. Bye.